The Silverton Ridge mansion was no ordinary house. Constructed of gray stone and massive glass panes, it was a fortress perched precariously on a dangerous cliff overlooking the sea. Below, the ocean waves crashed against the rocks like a hungry beast. Arian, a professional forensic auditor, arrived there on a misty Monday morning. His job was to inventory the estate and research of the late Dr. and then Vartan Dr. Vartan was a scientist specializing in sound frequencies who had mysteriously disappeared before his death. For the first 3 days, everything seemed normal. The mansion was silent, save for the roar of the waves hitting the windows. But on the night of the fourth day, the mansion broke its silence. The first thought it was exactly 2:12 am. Arian was jolted awake by a strange vibration. It felt as if a low sound was emanating from deep within the earth. Thump, 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 it didn't sound like a machine. It felt like the heartbeat of a massive creature. Arian rushed to the library with a flashlight, but as soon as he stepped inside, the sound stopped. He checked the basement but found nothing but electrical wires and stone. The mysterious diary. The next morning, Arian discovered Dr. Vartan's private diary. The handwriting on the final pages was terrifying and jagged. Sound is not just a noise. It is a world, Vartan had written. What we perceive as solid matter is actually a frozen frequency. If one could capture that infinite note, the boundary between humans and walls could be dissolved. I am very close. I can feel the mention. Breathing. Arian dismissed it as the ramblings of a mad scientist. However, at the back of the diary was a map of a secret room, the void chamber. This room had been carved into the granite of the hill and lined with layers of lead to prevent any external sound from entering. The deepening silence that night, the vibration returned. This time it was accompanied by a dragging sound. Scrape, a thump, scrape, thump. The noise was coming from behind the heavy bookshelves in the library. Pushing with all his might, Arian moved the shelf. Behind it, there was a hairline fracture in the stone wall. As he touched it, a secret stone door pivoted open. Inside were dark stairs descending into the belly of the cliff. At the bottom lay the void chamber. It was a circular room made of lead. In the center, on a glass stand, sat an old gramophone. Instead of plastic, it held a recording disc made of obsidian. With trembling hands, Arian cranked the handle and lowered the needle onto the disc. The final recording. Thousands of whispers first emerged from the speakers. Then came Dr. Vartan's voice, sounding as though he were speaking from underwater. The void is not empty. It is a mirror. I have played the infinite note, and the mansion has accepted the vibration. If you are hearing this, you have already become part of that vibration. This stone is hungry and it hasn't felt a human heartbeat in a long time. Suddenly, a sound in the recording made Arian's skin crawl, the same dragging noise he had heard in the library. But in the recording, that sound was coming from directly behind Dr. Vartan. The terrifying and terrified, Arian ran toward the stairs, but the stone door hadn't just closed, it had merged with the wall. There was no longer a door, only solid stone. He was trapped hundreds of feet underground in a lead spear. He tried to scream, but the lead walls swallowed his voice instantly. There was no echo. In that horrific silence, Arian began to hear the noise inside his own body. He could feel the blood rushing through his veins, sounding like a roaring ocean. Suddenly, the gramophone began to spin again. But this time, it wasn't playing the stone disc. The needle was floating in the air. Scraped, thump, scraped, thump. The sound was coming from the glass stand itself. Arian looked down. The stand was no longer transparent. It was slowly turning into human skin, with blue veins pulsing across it. Arian saw his reflection in the polished lead wall. His face was blurring. His eyes were turning into two dark pits, and his skin was becoming gray and hard like stone. Words began to emerge on the wall as if written by an invisible hand. Music needs an instrument. Welcome to the symphony of this mansion. Arian tried to lift his hand, but it was no longer flesh, it had turned to stone. He was no longer a man. He had become a part of the foundation of Silverton Ridge. A few hours later, the front door of the mansion opened. A new postman entered with letters. "Hello? Anyone home?" he called out. Arian tried to answer, but no sound left his throat. He could only produce a low vibration that the postman felt beneath his boots. Thump, thump, thump. The postman paused and smiled. Strange house. It almost feels like the walls want to say something. The wind didn't blow through the cracks of the Blackwood manor. It inhaled. Elora sat on the third step of the grand staircase, her fingers tracing the velvet pattern of a dress that had long ago lost its color. She was 7, or perhaps she had been 7 for a very long time. Time in the manor didn't move in a line. It circled like a trapped bird. At the foot of the stairs sat a small leather trunk. It was packed with care: 3 cotton dresses, a pair of scuffed leather shoes, and a wooden soldier with a chipped chin. Beside it lay a note, the ink faded to the color of a bruise. "Wait here, little bird. The stars must align before we can return for you." Elora remembered the smell of her mother's perfume lilacs and raining, the way her father's coat felt scratched against her cheek. They had told her it was a game of silence, a game of waiting. In winning, she whispered to the empty foyer. Her voice didn't echo, the dust seemed to swallow the sound. The passing seasons through the stained glass window high above, and Lyra watched the world change. Autumn brought gold leaves that scratched against the glass like fingernails. Winter draped the gargoyles in white shrouds. Spring crawled up the stone walls in vines that looked like reaching hands. She never felt hungry, only hollow. She spent her days dusting the frames of mirrors she couldn't see herself in and singing songs whose lyrics were slipping away like sand through a sieve. She wasn't lonely, she told herself. The house was full of memories. If she sat very still, she could hear the ghostly clink of teacups from the parlor, or the phantom laughter of a dinner party that ended decades ago. But no matter how loud the memories got, they never spoke to her. They never looked at the girl on the third step. One afternoon, the heavy oak doors groaned open. A sliver of real, harsh sunlight cut through the gloom. A man entered. He wore a bright orange vest and carried a clipboard. He smelled of coffee and exhaust fume smells that didn't belong in Elora's world of dust and lilacs. "Place is a wreck," the man muttered, his boots thumping heavily on the floorboards Elora knew were soft. "Demolition starts Monday. Can't believe it stood this long." Elora stood up. Her heart, a quiet thing, gave a frantic flutter. "Excuse me," she said, her voice a dry paper rustle. "You can't break it. They are coming back. The stars, they haven't aligned yet." The man didn't look at her. He walked right through where she stood, a sudden chill blooming in his chest. He shivered, rubbing his arms. "Spooky," he muttered, marking his paper. "Feels like the air just died in here." He walked to the small leather trunk at the base of the stairs. Elora watched, trembling, as he nudged it with his boot. The lock, rusted through, snapped. The man knelt down, pulling out a yellowed newspaper clipping tucked into the lid. He read it aloud, his voice flat and clinical. "Search called off for missing Blackwood child. Parents perish in carriage accident on North Road. Investigators believe the daughter was left behind in the estate, but no trace of the girl was ever found. The house remains sealed by probate." The man sighed, tossed the paper back into the trunk, and turned to leave. "Poor kid," he said, left waiting for ghosts. As that door slammed shut, bolting Elora back into the darkness, she looked down at her hands. They were translucent, the color of moonlight on water. She looked at the third step. She looked at the trunk. For the first time in a century, Elora didn't sit down. She walked to the window and pressed her hand against the glass. The glass didn't feel cold. She didn't feel the sun. "I am not winning the game anymore," she whispered. Outside, the stars began to poke through the twilight. They were aligned, just as her mother had promised. But there was no carriage on the drive. There were no lilacs in the air. There was only the house inhaling one last time before it let her go.